I came to Deep Springs when I was 16, and I wanted to get out of high school, and I didn't want to go to some place that seemed to me to be 4 years of a glorified high school, essentially. Deep Springs struck me as a very real alternative. I didn't realize at the time just how good an alternative I had chosen. From the very first day, I was put to work, had to get my act together, start the reading and everything else, and I haven't really looked back since.
I didn't know exactly what my reasons for wanting to come to Deep Springs were. It was mostly intuition. I just knew that I had to be here. And when I got in, there was no question where I was going to college. I had been accepted at a variety of Ivy League schools and very good, normal institutions, but there was no question. There was nothing like Deep Springs and where else I was applying.
What happens here as they are exposed to the physical world of work, as they are challenged by the incredibly rigorous academics that are here, as they learn to be responsible not only for themselves but for other members of the community, it makes an addition to the basic value and basic skill of that human being. And you just see it all the time. Every place you look, every alumnus that you encounter, you can almost say that student is a Deep Springs student.
I imagine that there won't be that much confusion on that.
The real key to the intensity and the excellence of the academic program is it's simple. It's a simple factor of its size. It's a very small program. We have 4 or 5 students in many classes, and one can't get lost there. One can't slip into the last row and take notes. If one hasn't done one's reading, everyone knows it, not only one's classmates, but also I, the teacher, find out pretty readily. And that aspect of having to participate, having to come with ideas prepared and ready, that is extremely valuable. That's a kind of educational experience that can transfer quite readily to any arena outside of Deep Springs.
And he starts the next section of the repressive hypothesis, which is called the perverse implantation, asking, well, why is there this discourse of sex? What is the social function of it? Actually coming to Deep Springs and being a student is a lot more intense, much more rigorous, and much harder an experience than I thought it would be. In the brochure, they don't tell you how little sleep you will get as a student. In the brochure, they don't tell you how difficult the academics are. Everything is far more rigorous, far more intense, and far more difficult than I ever thought it could be.
Having spent 4 different segments of my life at Deep Springs, as a student in the 1950s, as a faculty member in the 1960s, as a member of the board in the 1980s and early 1990s, and now coming back to Deep Springs as president, I suppose I have some insights that are at least somewhat unique. And the one thing I can conclude absolutely from this is that Deep Springs is what they now call a learning community, a community in which everybody is a teacher and everybody is a learner perpetually.
So it's not that domination starts and figures out all the details. It's that the details have a life of their own, and they have a particular kind of discourse. They have other reasons for occurring.
I've taught at Brown University and at the University of Oxford in England, and my regular post now is at Oxford, and I find that the caliber of students here is oftentimes at least as good as the caliber of students there. However, here there's a level of enthusiasm that's very difficult to find at a place like Brown or Oxford. And that, to me, is what makes Deep Springs students particularly unique and what makes it such a useful pedagogical experience for me. The other places I teach there because it's a sort of job and it allows one to do one's own research. Here, it's a real pleasure to teach. I really love teaching the students here. They're much more engaged, much more active in the classroom, and they're much more responsible in terms of taking charge of their own learning.
The fascinating thing about the curriculum here is this kind of negotiation or discussion that goes on about a course before it's ever even taught. So that when a faculty member and the students get together for the first time, there's already been a bonding, a connection, an expression of interest and a shaping of that course that doesn't exist at most institutions that I know anything at all about. And it's one of the reasons why I think we have such good courses here, because again, this interest, this discussion, this sharing of ideas that exists all throughout the curriculum, throughout the entire passage and life of a course.
I especially enjoy the close interpersonal contact with students here. My class at the present time has 8 students in it, and this arrangement provides not only an opportunity to present information but also to discuss it and stop at any time to answer questions or help students answer their own questions.
I found the students generally very bright, very eager to spend as much time as they can, given all their duties that they have to do here on the work at hand. So that's been pretty satisfying for me as a teacher as well. I also feel very strongly about the type of education that's being taught here, or the system where it's a combination of academics and labor and a self-governance thing. I feel that one of the things that's lacking in education today is that kind of balance.
One of the things that, is coming here as someone that's wanting to go in the science field, you find that at first it's sort of a scary thing to do, because there's really not that much research equipment. There's not that many lab facilities, but I think what you'll find is that there's probably a better chance coming here to work on science in a real sense. A lot of people, since they've gotten here, that have been interested in science have worked with our science faculty, and that's one of the things I was really interested in doing, is coming here and actually doing research instead of just simply doing the big lecture halls. I last year participated in an independent research project with Joe Suzak, who is one of our science faculty here. He is an animal physiologist and does a lot of work with bats, especially bat respiration.
Although we don't have a lot of offerings, what we do have here is that students that come in their first and second year and get involved directly in original research programs. And that's not something they can often do until they're in their upperclassmen years at many larger universities. Right now I'm working on a project with Jared Millman, a student here, in which we're looking at actually some of the neuroscience of the physiological control and seeing how the different receptors are integrated in the brain and brought together. And in doing that, we're using one of Jared's favorite topics, which is chaos mathematics. The bat's in the black box there, and the reason he's in the water is so that we can control his temperature. When he enters a state of physiological torpor, his body temperature is whatever we set the ambient temperature or the water temperature that he's in. It's not, he actually likes being in that black box. The reason we use this type of bat is they naturally roost in crevices. So we put them in this little teeny black box, and after being in there a couple times, they actually crawl right into it on their own. What we're doing right now is passing different concentrations of oxygen and carbon dioxide through to measure his ventilatory response and compare that to control conditions on the same bat and a group which we're doing. This bat has just spent the last 6 weeks up at a high altitude station on the White Mountain Research Station at an elevation of 12,500 feet. And one of our Deep Spring students actually stayed up there with him for that period and flew him every day to actively acclimatize him to that elevation.
We have a library of about 25,000 volumes, and if there's something you need that is not found in our library, you can order it through the University of California system. And 25,000 volumes isn't that small for a school of about 26 students. It's almost 1,000 volumes for every student.
Deep Springs has what would be considered a typical high desert cattle operation. We run about 300 cows on primarily public land, but Deep Springs owns about 2,000 acres, some of which is in pasture, 160 acres of which is in alfalfa. We raise all of our own alfalfa. With any luck, each year we raise some extra to sell. From that 300 cows, we try to sell about, we have about 230 calves. We save about 50 heifers to replace cows in our herd, and we sell the rest through normal beef cattle markets. Time and time again, I've seen students who came here feeling that the labor program was something that they might put up with for the sake of having the rest of this experience. But during the course of their time at Deep Springs, found that the self-discipline and the self-reliance that was developed in the labor program translated into other areas of their life, particularly the academics, and caused them to be able to perform better there.
Sort of the set of qualities that Deep Springs often imparts to its students, which may be most useful in a really general sense, is a sense of self-reliance and independence. I think just about everyone who comes here runs into areas of work, whether in academics or labor, in which they have really no previous experience and no training. And in that situation, people make a lot of mistakes. I've made a lot of mistakes, but you also end up succeeding at things you just never even imagined yourself attempting before you came here.
The labor program, like everything else in the brochure, I think has a little too much of a Hollywood sheen. You get here and come to realize that ranch work doesn't have such a glossy majesty as is depicted in the brochure. You also come to realize that 4 hours of hard work are 4 hours of hard work. Time moves in a different way when you're digging sludge out of an irrigation ditch. But there are also ways in which it augments spiritual growth that you don't even consider when you read about the labor program in the Deep Springs College brochure.
I was a student here from 1982 to 84, and I've taught here various times over the last 4 years. The labor program was a very valuable aspect of the place for me as a student. The best labor experience I think I had was perhaps being feed man. It's a very good job. One's on the ranch every day. You see the sunrise, you see the sunset, and it's nice physical labor, and you're taking care of the animals. There's nothing to really beat that.
What is unique about the Deep Springs educational program insofar as the labor is concerned is that it is positively authentic. At Deep Springs, the total authenticity of the work is what matters, is what makes it so different. There is no job at Deep Springs that doesn't have to be done. There is no job that a student does at Deep Springs that if it's not done right does not negatively affect the entire community. We see how we affect each other here, and that's the power of the experience.
Another thing that I think happens here is that students learn to not hold in awe things that they, at least initially, don't understand. They develop a certain kind of confidence that if they can get into something, if they can take it apart, literally or figuratively, they can put it back together again and make it work. And I think that kind of confidence translates into embracing, grasping, dealing with new ideas as well as things that they don't understand.
In a lot of ways, the changes I think that are affected in you through the labor program are subtle and sort of take a long time to sort of you get the perspective to look back and say, you know, exactly what you've gained. And with the position I'm on right now, which is the mechanics assistant, I've sort of come like, you know, one step closer to what I actually, you know, live in. I've, you know, sort of lost the fear of something breaking and just sort of stepping back and calling a professional in to fix it. You know, I've gotten to where the point to the point where I can sort of walk up to something that's broken and look at it or try to figure out what's going on with it. And that may be part of it too, sort of remove the alienation that sometimes is felt between oneself and sort of the tools or the environment that you find yourself in.
Every Deep Springs student is expected to labor at least 20 hours a week here. Many people, upon hearing this, make the assumption that the labor program is a way in which students can compensate for their full-ride scholarship here. This is not the case, however. The labor program is considered an integral and definitive aspect of the Deep Springs education. Our founder, L.L. Nunn, was frustrated by young men's inability to blend the abstract and practical worlds of various kinds of knowledge. So he set up a school in which young men could both learn abstract and practical things.
The Hydro project was built to take advantage of the water in Wyman Creek that we bring to the college for irrigation purposes. A lot of people feel that the Hydro project for Deep Springs was a particularly appropriate thing to do because L.L. Nunn, the founder of the college, was in the electric business himself. Built the first AC generating plant west of the Mississippi River in Telluride, Colorado, and then subsequently went on to develop hydroelectric power in several western states. And his first educational enterprise, in fact, began in a hydro plant in Utah. So building the hydro plant here seemed particularly appropriate.
When Deep Springs was founded, the charter, the deed of trust that was set up by L.L. Nunn, made an interesting point that the students of Deep Springs were the beneficial owners of the college. And there's been a lot of discussion over the years as to exactly what that means. There is little discussion over a couple of the other points that were also in the deed of trust, and that is that the students were to be responsible for their own behavior, for their own governance. One of the principal pillars that Deep Springs rests on is this notion of student self-governance.
There's no alienation from the administration at Deep Springs because the students are the administration. Every student at Deep Springs is part of the student body, which is somewhat of a political body. We meet every Friday night when all our friends at other colleges are going to parties. We're sitting in a room together, devising our own rules. We discuss motions and discuss rules regarding the administration of Deep Springs, the administration of the student body itself, but also of what else goes on here in terms of applications, curriculum, re-invitations, etc. And then we also discuss rules regarding community conduct.
Just answer the phone in some sort of proper fashion, whatever you deem to be proper. And also recognize the difference between phone calls that are local and phone just on the ranch, and phone calls that are coming in from the outside. It's a double ring if it's on the ranch, and it's just one ring like a normal phone at home when it's coming from the outside.
Student self-governance here is not just governing their own affairs, but student governance is involved in every aspect of the life of the college. And at Deep Springs, students start right off by assuming that anything that has to do with the life of the college or life here in the valley is something in which they need to be involved, to participate, to help make the decisions.
Student government takes a great deal of energy on the part of the students, and it's energy well spent. It's a very important responsibility. It's not a kind of farce that students go through pretending to have authority. It's very real authority.
Would somebody else, it's not a cattle drive for 8 hours in the morning. There's a need for somebody to do cowboy work in the morning with Jason.
Me and Brett.
Yeah, but can somebody do it for Brett so he can cook in the afternoon?
Well, I could, but I've done it a bunch of times.
Could you cook?
Jared?
When is this going to be done? I'll be back in time for lunch.
You'll be back probably in time for breakfast.
Student body government, I think, is probably one of the most crucial aspects of Deep Springs, and I think probably one of the hardest for the people here. being able to have some sort of agency in your own life and your own academic life, helping to make decisions that matter on an institutional level, I think is something that's really appealing to a lot of us, and I know I certainly was interested in coming here for that.
They do have the primary say in choosing courses, selecting faculty, selecting incoming students, and many other issues of quotidian importance here.
It is not some other administrative body that chooses who will be in the next Deep Springs student body. It's actually the students who will choose their classmates.
And so one of the ideas I was thinking of was make a much more detailed evaluation sheet, so people would have much more of a clue of what they're, much more of a concrete basis on which to judge those applications which they're reading.
It seems one of the ways that you most directly affect the future of the college, in that you're deciding the exact people who you're going to live with for the next year, as well as the people that will carry on Deep Springs into the future. No matter what decision is made, you have to live with the people that come, and I think that not only was there a satisfaction, a really great satisfaction, after deciding the final 14 people, calling them and say, hey, you want to come live at Deep Springs? And that was just really great, to see their reactions. It's also, probably even more heartening to really live with them this year and see them settled in and see them exploring the place and finding what they want to get out of it, and seeing them think about the same things you thought about last year. It's really just been just a fabulous experience, and that's why I'm pretty much looking forward to being being involved in that same process this year. I think what makes Deep Springs both a different place and a very positive, different in a very positive way, is the community that exists here. And in a way, people oftentimes talk about the three pillars of Deep Springs being academics, self-governance, and labor. But at least the way I like to think of it is that the community is almost the foundation for those three pillars.
Dinner and meal times are really community times, and it's a time in which we can gather around the table and at the end of the day or in the beginning of the day. And some of the best conversations I've had at Deep Springs have existed around the dinner table. I've never laughed so hard as I have around the Deep Springs dinner table. So not only is mealtime fantastic because the food is fantastic, but it's also a real community time and something that can be a lot of fun. And mealtime makes Deep Springs feel like home.
In the long run, actually, the friendships that can be formed here and that are formed here and that I formed here have some really significant impact on your life. I think it's one of the crucial parts of being here, The friends that you make here, you work with them, you talk with them, you study with them, you do almost all aspects of your life together, and you get to know them in a very intense way, in a very real way.
It's probably going to be very few people that I know, and maybe no people that I know quite as holistically as I do know them at Deep Springs.
We have 9 trustees, one of whom is a student trustee. But an alumnus made a comment the other day with regard to alumni and trustees. He said, "You think you have only 9 trustees? That's not right. You have about 700 trustees." Because every alumnus who has been here, because they were involved in student governance, because they were involved in helping to build the physical walls or the structures that are here, feel very closely about this place, feel very strongly about this place. Because of the intense community, because of the active student involvement, because of the total experience that is Deep Springs, every alumnus who comes through here, I think is probably permanently imprinted in some way with the effects of this place on them.
The valley is beautiful. The thing that's amazing to me is that Deep Springs is here. You come out over the Westgard Pass down into the valley, and it's just this huge open space. It's wide and very brown and surrounded by these beautiful mountains on both sides. And then there's this little patch of green that you see way in the distance. And And that's Deep Springs, and it just feels like an oasis out here. I've done a little bit of hiking around the area, and you can get up onto the surrounding mountains here and see over to the Sierras, and you can see the Sierras from the college too.
The sheer physical beauty of the surroundings are very important in terms of personal growth here, at least for some students every year. That becomes an intensely valuable factor in learning to contemplate and learning to step back from the things they're learning, learning to take not exactly time out, but a time where they can look into themselves and consolidate the things they're learning.
And so an important part of the experience at Deep Springs is actually discovering who you are in relation to the physical world. And so encountering this really strange kind of alien physical world and coming to deal with it and learning that you can pretty much exist in it, survive in it, and excel in it is an amazing part, I think, of, again, what Deep Springs is about.
I remember when I first got here as an applicant and really saw the place. I had sort of, built up this image in my mind, but it really wasn't anything that would really prepare me for what I was going to be coming into. It was, a real sort of surprise to walk out and find yourself in the middle of this valley. I think that's also really important in my decision to come here.
It's one of the great opportunities in life. It's something that a student would be crazy to pass up. Any other university, any other institution of learning just can't offer the sort of learning experience that Deep Springs can offer. It's academically excellent and much else besides that you simply cannot get at any other university.
The capital campaign, as I think about it, is a tripod, and it depends on three things working together in order to come out with a stable end product. And one is that we have to re-endow the college so we have resources sufficient to guarantee another 80 years of operation. Second, we have to rebuild the physical plant, which has had hard use for 80 years and now needs to be redeveloped and refurbished, and in some cases rebuilt for seismic refitting. But the third, and I think equally important, crucial leg of this triangle, of this tripod, is the educational vision of the college. Founded by a visionary coming out of the 19th century, Deep Springs has principles that are as sound as they can be and still very experimental, very progressive. And what we're looking toward now is students who will be spending the whole heart and bulk of their careers in the 21st century. So we are looking at trying to apply principles that were highly pertinent to the era in which none lived, and finding ways that the principles can remain as clear and viable as they have been in the past. So we need to be pertinent to our times, while we are also as true to our fundamentals as we can possibly be. So it's the renewing of this vision of what we are and what our educational mission is that I view as being as important as re-endowing the college financially and rebuilding it physically.